Enough of treating nature like a toilet. Enough of burning and drilling and mining our way deeper. We are digging our own graves.
Climate Channel, Climate Conversation with Quamrul Chowdhury, episode 52nd. In this episode, we are going to discuss about the just concluded COP26 in Glasgow, climate conference in UK, which has already been done and dusted. So what we have achieved in COP26, we are going to share with a very rich and distinguished panels, which included two COP Presidency, welcome our Climate Channel, Cruszczow from Poland, and also Paris, from Paris COP Presidency for Witconsin. And also we have panelists like Professor Abdullah Shibli, Felix Von Geyer, Maria Rotunda, Kuki Soejachmoen, Matti Nummelin, Sarah Miller, and we are also expecting one or two more panelists. Without much ado, I would now like to ask Paul, you have presided over the Paris Climate Pact. Paris Agreement is now on implementation. So how far we have progressed in Glasgow COP26, from your perspective, what is your reflection? How do you see that the implementation is going to get on the ground? Because it was our dream to have Paris Agreement, and you have worked relentlessly to make that happen. So we must acknowledge that in Paris, COP Presidency had galvanized the momentum, and we have had that agreement over there. So what is your take, Paul?
Thank you, Quamrul, and good morning, good afternoon, as it is in Paris, good evening to everyone, wherever you are. Thank you. I mean, obviously, I was only part of the Paris presidency back in 2015. It was a pleasure to meet Laurent Fabius again back in the margins of Glasgow, and many others who were part of that team are still around, as you will have noticed. I mean, I think looking at where we are, on the one hand, we've gone a long way, and I think particularly finishing off all the work on the rules with the agreements on Article 6, and having chaired SBSTA for 2 years in 2018 and 2019, and not got those rules through when I was in charge. I was delighted to see that all that work paid off with those decisions being adopted in Glasgow. I think also the transparency decision, those tabular formats, those draft reports, that's really vital, because that's the heart of the implementation of the Paris Agreement. Without that, it really would have been very difficult to move forward. So let's be, you know, those are really good results. And I congratulate all of those involved in getting them. So I think we've now got the rule set we need to move forward properly with implementation. Of course, the real challenge, as we all know, is the level of ambition and the level of action and delivery. And I think a lot of the debate in Glasgow was focusing rightly on those, rightly on the level of ambition of the nationally determined contributions, the long-term strategies, and of course the delivery also on finance and support in the broader sense. And I think in those terms, it's clear we still got a lot to do. There was some progress in Glasgow. Let's recognize that. but we're still far from where we need to be on a 1.5 degree pathway and to really deliver the sort of scale of finance and support we need. So I think we've made real progress on the rules. That's great. But it's the implementation that really matters, and it's really moving that forward. So I think we've set up a number of ways to continue that, to strengthen further action, to get people back to raise the ambition further, and in particular to focus on delivery, not just on mitigation, but I think the adaptation side was coming very strongly, as well as loss and damage through the work in Glasgow. So we can see the way forward. The question is, will we be up to the level that we need? And I think that's the big question coming out of Glasgow. Are we going to be able to deliver the level of action and delivery which is needed to put us on a 1.5 degree pathway?
Thank you for setting that tone. I would now like to request Thomas. What would be your take, your reflection?
Well, my reflection is kind of external reflection, as I did not go to Glasgow. So I can only assess the results after seeing the adopted decisions, after having that many media surveys of that, and also after listening to certain debates through the webcast. I think that Glasgow was really great success, and despite all, let's say, shortages, let's call it this way, what has been achieved, what the negotiators, what parties managed to achieve, is really impressive. That is really something that opens up the way to pursue real life climate action. And this is, from my perspective, the most important achievement of Glasgow. It's not just about Article 6 implementation that has been finalized well, at this stage. That does not mean that this is given forever and nobody would be revisiting the rules. But what has been adopted allows cooperation between businesses and parties, allows cooperation between parties, opens the debate on how to implement this non-market actions. And I'm keeping repeating the word actions because this is exactly what Article 6 and this part of the Glasgow decision were about, to enable more action, to enable ambition through action, to enable revisiting NDCs thanks to these actions. And so for me, Glasgow is a big success.
Thank you for your initial reaction. I'll come back to you again. Felix, can you hear me? Felix Von Geyer. Felix, can you hear me?
He's muted.
Yeah. Okay. You unmute. Felix, you unmute.
No, I've unmuted myself.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh. Yeah, so it's all very interesting because I was reading back through the paper this morning.
Yeah.
And like, there's still so much there, like the loss and damage, the adaptation, the transparency, which are big issues still really to be negotiated. And I was also thinking about 2022, we're also going to be revisiting the ambition as well. And I was thinking that this should also be informed by, we still have IPCC reports from working groups 2, 3, and 4 to kind of come along. So I'm kind of hoping that, you know, this will send further urgency in those ambitions, because as previous people are saying, we're not on track to reach 1.5 degrees. It's an aspiration, but really we're far away from it. And so we've still got all to play. As I said yesterday, we've kind of kicked the can down the road, but at least we've all selected which can we're kicking and in which direction. But to actually kind of get it there is still like a major feat, and there's so much at stake.
Okay, yeah. Okay, I'll come back to you again. Kuki.
Yes.
Kuki.
Yeah. All right. Yeah.
What is your reflection? How do you see the outcome?
Yeah, I think
we have a lot of expectations, especially the most vulnerable countries, we the developing countries, global south. We have a lot expectations.
Yeah, I think as already mentioned by Paul and Thomas as well, and also later by Felix, there are quite a number of progress that we achieve, but there are also a number of I should say homework for the next sessions, because especially on the support part of it, and if we are talking about ambition, then as you know, Quamrul, and you mentioned also that for us, for developing countries, somehow it will really depend on what kind of support that can we get from developed countries, especially. And I think this is still like, Paul, it's your area. I mean, like financing and support, and Thomas on technology as well, because there are still a big gap, if I can say, on ensuring how the actions by developing countries can be supported. But on the other hand, on Article 6, I think it's as already mentioned correctly by Thomas. I mean, the dynamics during the session was interesting, but also as I understand it, there will be more negotiation and technical work, right? Because what we have in Glasgow is basically like quite a number of principles, even though it's honestly speaking, it's more than what I was expecting of the decision in Glasgow can be. But as we understand that a lot of homework, both at international negotiation level, but also in every nation. I think especially if we are talking about how to implement the whole Article 6. So that's my take, Quamrul. Thank you.
Thank you. Sarah, from the perspective of the presidency, COP26 presidency, how do you see? You have worked quite relentlessly, try to have captured most of the elements, major elements in the outcome document, decision text. So it's a huge work, but say there are a lot of frustrations, a lot of say anxieties, but at the end of the day, on say 13th of November, what we have achieved, how do you say unpack that package?
Thank you, Quamrul. I won't claim to speak for the presidency. I'm not sure I would be as flattering as they would be about themselves and the success of Glasgow. But I think what I would say is I was deeply impressed by the work of, for example, the Climate Vulnerable Forum, ably chaired by Bangladesh. And I don't think it's a surprise that the agreement is called the Glasgow Climate Pact, when it was the Climate Vulnerable Forum calling for the Glasgow
climate emergency. The emergency is not over here.
And I think that missing word is really important. And Paul has already alluded to it. Glasgow and Kuki were saying, the outcomes were better than expected, but we still are not on a pathway for properly addressing the emergency part of climate action. And so I think what we've got from Glasgow are some hooks and some processes to set us on an emergency pathway, but we are not yet on it. So in terms of kicking the can down the road, I agree with them, the analogy that was made about kicking it in the right direction, but it's how we choose to do that next year. And so I think, when we come back to the table, with revisited NDCs or restatement of NDCs, that will help us. And as Paul has said, there are various IPCC reports to come next year, which will provide a bit of a stick for us to do that and to address
We have a lot of homework to do. So this thank you. I am coming back to you again. Felipe Diaz.
Yes. Can you hear me?
So what would be your take, your reflection?
We can hear you.
Yeah.
Well, my reflections. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we hear you. What is your good. Video? Your video on?
Yeah. My reflections are. I mean, I'm encouraged that Article 6 has gone through. But while it kind of gives us a mechanism, I'm wondering really what governments are going to do to actually make sure it's really part of.
Felipe Diaz.
Well, sorry.
Felipe.
It was. Quamrul, there was a mix-up. Felix is speaking, and you meant
no.
Felipe.
Yeah.
Felipe
Diaz.
Yeah.
Felipe Diaz.
Yes.
Sorry.
How are you?
What would be your take? How do you?
Well, I was involved more in Article 13 on transparency. So also,
there is some progress, at least.
Yeah, we have a closure, which is always good to have, and maybe even if we are not were finally happy about the conclusion. Which is also part of the negotiations. I don't think in a negotiation all parties can be happy about the result.
It's part of the negotiation. You see, it's part of the negotiation.
That's kind of the common ground. But what I think it's very important here is now we have the rules, we have the basis to start working, to start implementing in each of our countries. Start working. We have the rules. We can now work on public policies to see what we need to do to start providing the information on the BTRs since 2024. We have basically 2 years to preparing this information, to prepare this work. We will be expecting from the Secretary to provide us all the tools and information we will need and the capacity building we will need. But it's what is needed. Otherwise, we cannot we are not going to be able to follow the path of our commitments and the accomplish of the goal of the Paris Agreement. So in that way, I'm quite happy that finally we can start working on the implementation.
Thank you for your take. Maria Rotunda. How do you evaluate that?
Oh, okay. So I'm giving you more from the perspective outside from citizen society, because I've worked with an organization called Citizens Climate Lobby International and some other citizens organizations to try to both communicate and bring accountability. And my perspective is similar to all of yours regarding the emergency of it. I do feel like that a lot of people on the outside do not feel that it's successful because of the ideas of the climate, the loss and damage and climate finance being short, and then the lack of the ambition meeting the target, that they didn't understand that the ambition for this COP was set very high expectations, and I think that is the bridge between what the expectations were, which we knew that could never be what people's expectations were. So how do you turn people now that are very cynical back to, but not everyone is, but there are a lot of people. I mean, even I have friends that are university professors that are very, that follow closely and have a great deal of frustration. But so how to turn all that and then to set it up for the next steps for the actionable plans so that everything gets closer to where we need to be at the rapid pace. But yes.
Thank you. Matti, you have been in the process for many years, and especially you had a very great heart for the least developed countries, and you are also in LDCF, least developed country expert group. So how do you see the outcome in terms of, say, LDC work program, leg mandate that has been expanded?
Well, thank you, Quamrul, and thank you everybody who have raised already that what have been reached in Glasgow, and I can't congratulate colleagues who have negotiated there, because I know that it has been a hard work, and I think from the negotiators' point of view, many things have been solved, and well, especially on the adaptation. I'm happy that there was a really increase in the adaptation fund, and that's really encouraging, and also the loss and damage is now more seriously discussed. And finally, actually, I would say that I'm now on the side of Maria as an activist.
You are a professor now, Professor Emeritus.
Yes, so I'm happy on the behalf of my grandchildren that the way up to 1.5 degrees is still open, and that's why it's still very important that activists like grandparents are really building pressure for the politicians.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll come back to you again. Professor Abdullah Shibli.
Oh, thank you so much.
What is your take? Yeah.
As an outsider, I have mixed feelings, as you all do. I just finished an op-ed for the Daily Star, where I say that whether the conference or the summit was a success depends on whether you're an optimist or a pessimist. And again, as everybody, all of you have said, the glass is half full. If you count deforestation, additional funding, and agreements on the rules. But if you look at the half empty glass, there were some disappointments. Obviously, there was a lot of talk, blah, blah, blah. I don't want to quote her, but also the expectation was too high. And when Alok Sharma said this is the last chance or best hope, I don't think that's true. It's an ongoing process. It will be an ongoing process and has to be addressed in the next meetings. And I was disappointed, though, that Pakistan's representative, Mr. Malik, said that, hey, all this amounts to nothing. I don't know if you followed him. He said, well, with an average age of 60, where I fall, I don't think anyone in the negotiating room would live to experience that net zero in 2070. So that net zero in 2070 is pushing or kicking the can, as you say, too further down. Whether we can kick it back to 2050, I don't know. I'm a Bangladeshi. I hope we do get some real, but also a citizen of the United States where I work. So I see there's a lot of skepticism. And I follow the New York Times, which is saying, look, things might happen, things might not happen. We'll see what happens 2022. Thank you.
Thank you for your very succinct and sharp shooting, Shibli bhai. I would now like to come back again, Paul. You are heavily involved in preparatory work in the run-up to Paris. And as Paris presidency, you tried your best to craft a very good agreement. Though we have some, say, frustration, but all said and done, you could deliver with France's diplomatic charm. But now we are at the implementation stage, 6 years gone by. And rule book almost accomplished. Though some pieces we have to again say come back in Egypt, Sharm el Sheikh. Next year we have a lot of homework. So how best you would like to say in terms of implementation, how best we can fare a better deal down the road, so that full and effective implementation of Paris Agreement is up and running. Paul, you take.
Great. I don't think I can give a full answer to that question, which is huge. And I think we all have to take forward the implementation. I think it's useful to see it at different levels. There's a piece which is going to be taken forward in the subsidiary bodies next year, and then in the COP in Sharm el Sheikh, and then into 2023, taking us up to the COP in the Emirates, particularly with the global stocktake taking place that year. And that's going to be, yes, some of the ongoing work which was planned by the decisions here. Some of the work which was programmed, I think particularly around the global goal on adaptation. Clearly loss and damage is going to be rising. We heard the messages at the end of the COP. We're all going to have to engage on that more probably than we have in the past. And certainly clearly areas around finance and developing the new finance goal are going to be high on the list of issues for those COPs. And I can imagine particularly the Egyptian presidency next year wanting to put adaptation and loss and damage and finance very high on the list of their priorities, taking that forward. I think it's an understandable and natural, that will be very much there. Clearly, the raising ambition is still the thing which is going to make the difference. We can adapt so much, but the less we can mitigate, it's harder to adapt, and the more loss and damage we will end up with. So it's this permanent equation of this balance between the three. So raising the level of ambition and action remains the most critical thing for us to get. It's not going to come simply by decisions. There's going to have to come, yes, it's going to be partly there. They're very useful. And I think COP26 created a political moment that required ministers, but also heads of state, heads of government to come prepared to say things, prepared to do things moving forward. And you can do that every so often. Even if we've asked everyone to review their NDCs to align them with the temperature goal, it's unlikely that everybody will do that next year. And all of us will no doubt say, but our NDC is aligned with the temperature goal. Well, I suspect none of us is. So, I mean, the challenge is, how do we really build on that in the next 2 or 3 years? And that's really going to bring it back into a domestic context, where it's clearly an issue we're going to have to deal with civil society, with citizens, with different groups in society, as well as simply the negotiations. You can't negotiate a target at an international level. It has to be owned within a country. And I think it's one of the challenges we always have when we raise the expectations too high, as probably it was done in Glasgow. You can't just come and announce things. You have to have the political support and the bedrock in which to implement things. That's much harder to produce. And it's got to be a feedback between the multilateral process pushing for that, but the domestic process making that possible and delivery. So we're going to have to really build that up. So I think particularly those speaking from more an activist and a civil society side, there's a really big part for them also in really making that possible in the next few years. It won't just come from speeches. It needs to be delivery.
Thank you, Paul. Felipe, Diaz.
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I think Paul have a real interesting point here, that with this decision made on the COP26, we have something to work with, and what is the next step on the updating of the NDCs, on presenting the new reports and providing the data to know how are we doing with the inventories and the NDC achievement and the support needed and received and transfer and mobilize. We have this information, and with that now it's under our task going through our public policies and define, for example, climate change law or other institutional arrangement that can help us to define how we're going to do all these things in our countries, because it's going to be hard. We need to have all of this arrangement being done during the next year, and for that we will need the help for all ministries in each of our countries. And if we don't have the arrangements made, it's a really difficult task to go door by door asking for the information, the commitments. And for that, having a previously defined arrangement is going to be very helpful. It's what we are trying to do in Chile with the climate change framework law, that will help us to have the information from all the sectors, that the information will be provided each year, so we can handle the information, put it on our BTR, or also to have it on hand to later on updating our NDC each 5 years as the common timeframes is asking us now to do so. Thank you.
Thank you. Matti.
Yes, thanks, Quamrul and colleagues. Well, I would say that there was something important also what happened, not exactly in the negotiations, but all the declarations which were given, or the initiatives which were provided there, and I think that the discussion on the fossil fuels subsidies and abandoning all the coal energy are important signals for investors, and there might be changes which are going to happen more quickly than we expect. I hope so. And also when there was an initiative on methane emissions and the halting the forest loss, and those are promising, and they are signals for the investors as much as the results of the negotiations. So I don't see any reason for cynicism. Cynicism is laziness, Maria. Cynicism is laziness. Thank you.
Thank you, Matti. Maria.
No, I definitely agree with the cynicism is not, and so you always bridge the gap between being realistic about the level of where you're at, and then people's frustration with the fact that they've been themselves, and a lot of times at the forefront of this issue for 20 years, and they still don't see that they don't see it's just like anything. There's always the chips in the wall, and then the change happens, and people, when you're in the middle of it, you don't see it. So that's definitely how to bridge that gap, and then keep those people energized so that they can hold their own governments. Even the local governments have a lot to do with, state and local have a lot to do with raising the ambition, because California has been so instrumental in all of the things that we've been able to get to, and so just to continue on there, it's very important.
Thomas.
Well, let me share with you, just maybe slightly different angle. I just tried to look at this history of the negotiations, the history of COPs, and I know this history quite well from my personal experience, and for me, we could probably translate UNFCCC as kind of GPPP, because it's G for global, and this triple P is global problem. We have global process to tackle it, and we need global partnership to be successful and efficient. And by the way, the declarations that I think are very valuable, because the declarations were the actual persons, actual representatives of governments, actual representatives of businesses are signed, that is even stronger than any, by the way, not legally binding decision of the COP, because the COP decisions, except very limited lists of those, are not legally binding. So the countries that bound themselves to subscribe to certain actions, that is very valuable. And if we look at into the past, and not very distant past, we had a COP in Copenhagen. Well, the first time the leaders came. Well, the result was not impressive from formal point of view, but politically, it happened for the first time. So it's a merit in it that we achieved the almost consensus in Cancun, and then each COP closed us up to Paris, and after Paris, each COP added something which resulted at first stage in the Katowice rulebook, and then hopefully successfully implemented Glasgow Climate Pact. So there is a progress. We are talking about the process that involves, in fact, all countries of the world, with the entire cultural, language, geographical, economic, well, think of any more adjectives, differences, which have to be somehow included in the conversation and taken into account when discussing the final text. I can remember 2 or 3 years ago, colleagues who were US colleagues who were trying to be helpful from language perspective and suggesting some improvements to make the language more explicit and more clear, but other colleagues, non-native English speakers, said, no, we don't want it. This is our text and we want to keep it. And that's why we have the decision from this very COP, quoting some strange formulation that came not from the English-speaking world. But after the whole history, well, let's think what we had in the media 5 years ago, 6 years ago. Despite of all Paris enthusiasm, we still had many questioning anthropogenic nature of climate change. Doesn't happen now. Who would dare to question the need to adapt? I can remember even after Paris, some negotiators, mind you, saying, well, adaptation is an excuse for more emissions. Well, who would be brave enough to say that right now and try to make the case out of it? So we are making progress.
Yeah.
Could we do more? Maybe. But let's take into account what kind of process it is. Let's take into account that environment is here. It's why we are meeting and we are discussing economy. We are discussing developmental patterns, and all these diversities of the world have to be taken into account. So I will repeat, especially I would like to encourage Sarah and through you, all the members of UK presidency team. You can be proud of the results. Thank you.
Thank you. It appears that Quamrul has gone missing. Now let's see if he's still here. Quamrul? He is.
Excuse me, sorry,
Quamrul.
I dropped. Excuse me.
You dropped the call. Okay, Come back.
Okay. Abdullah bhai, Shibli bhai, please continue. Please continue.
Okay.
Quamrul bhai will join very soon. Please continue.
Okay. So I am just the backup. As you all know, in all international conferences and policies, you need a backup. I just became the backup without any design, any planning. What I see here is Pierre Candelon. I haven't met him, but Pierre, since you didn't speak yet, would you like to say a few words about the COP26 Glasgow conference, your reflection very briefly while we are waiting for Quamrul to join? You're muted, Pierre.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'll try to fill the gap. Hello, everyone, and nice to meet you. So I'm Pierre. I work now part-time in collaboration on loss and damage, which is called the Loss and Damage Collaboration, whose purpose is to coordinate, more actually being an informal space for discussions on loss and damage between civil society members, but also representatives of party groups, and including from LDCs, African group, AOCs. We provide the space between CAN and the party so that we can have safe discussions around loss and damage. And we've been quite involved in this negotiation sessions, of course. But I don't want to repeat anything. If anyone has already talked about loss and damage, I don't want to be redundant, no?
We haven't heard any numbers or how much loss and damage is going to be, or what is the formula or rule. I think it's still at a very early stage in terms of loss and damage negotiations. Is that correct? Am I wrong? So you can certainly give us your perspective on that. Just take 2 minutes, maybe.
Yeah, sure. Some here in this space have way more history and COPs than I have. But actually, loss and damage has already appeared quite a long time ago and has really emerged at COP19 with the creation of the Warsaw International Mechanism on Loss and Damage. So which is a space where you have the WIM, the Warsaw International Mechanism, then you have the XCOM, and then you have several expert groups on several topics, including action and support, including human mobility, including non-economic losses. And in the recent years, including under Article 8 of the Paris Agreement on loss and damage, a lot of developing countries have been really pushing loss and damage into the negotiations. And maybe I won't go into all the details, but although a lot of countries we work with and a lot of civil society members are quite disappointed with the outcome of COP26 because they wanted to push, especially in the final run, on a loss and damage facility, so which would be really able to provide finance on loss and damage. They haven't been successful, but still on a lot of topics, there was significant progress on loss and damage, and I think we have heard a lot about loss and damage at this COP. So including on the Santiago network, which has been partially operationalized on technical assistance brought to developing countries and vulnerable communities on loss and damage, including by the setup of a dialogue to actually discuss loss and damage finance in the next sessions, including with strong push and strong wording on loss and damage in the cover decision of COP26, which we haven't really had in the past. So there's still a long way to go, but I think loss and damage has really emerged as we could say third pillar of the climate action with adaptation mitigation, but we also have to consider finance, of course. But now there's really a huge recognition that there are limits to adaptation and that we need a space to talk about the damages already caused by climate change and space to talk about the funding. And I also understand some positions of developed countries that want to be additional to all the tools that already exist on disaster risk reduction, on adaptation, on development, on humanitarian action. There are a lot of gaps, and we need places, spaces to be able to discuss these gaps and to provide what is missing. So I think we're moving in the right direction, although I mean, if you compare to expectations, were really insufficient.
Thank you, Pierre. I would just like to add one aspect to the whole climate discussion. As Pierre mentioned, there are three pillars of the climate negotiation, but I would also like to draw your attention to another aspect: implementation and monitoring and transparency. And that has been one of the weaknesses or one of the aspects that we need to fill the gap. As Felipe mentioned, in Chile, they have developed a system. It's almost like a monitoring board where all the measures that have been taken will be clearly visible. In other words, transparencies. How are the countries implementing their NDCs, the national contributions? How much progress has been made? Finally, as an economist, as a practicing economist, I would like to say that economic incentives and market-based solutions are important because we're talking now about carbon tax, we're talking more about market-based ETS systems where there would be trading, and definitely for poorer countries, if there is a carbon tax, universal carbon tax, how are they going to be compensated? That's an important aspect. If we have to export to Europe and they have a very strict carbon tax system, are we going to be given some kind of preferences? So that is just my 2 cents. Thank you, Quamrul. Welcome back.
Sorry, this is third world phenomenon. I have lost my connection. So connectivity. We are the outcome of Glasgow COP26. What is your reaction?
Yeah, so I just gave a 3-minute speech and basically tried to summarize everything I thought. So I won't impose this to the other members of the group, but happy to write it down via email if you want, Quamrul, because I already talked about this. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. What is your final word?
I wanted to reflect on what Paul and Matti were saying about implementation next year, and I think the Glasgow Climate Pact has given us some acceleration hooks around the NDCs and around 1.5. And for me, outside of the formal stock-taking process, I think where we're heading is that every COP becomes a stock-taking moment. Every COP becomes an annual climate State of the Union. And this is the accountability. So in a way that world leaders have arrived in COPs, and Thomas was saying, you know, the first time that happened was in Copenhagen in COP15. This is now becoming the norm. And it's almost like that is becoming the international peer pressure accountability process. And my analogy is, you know, these world leaders are turning up at a party and, you know, we're all very polite here, and you don't turn up at a party without a gift for the host. And the gift for the host on this occasion is either a new commitment or an account of how you have already been delivering and implementing your previous gift. And so I think that is where we're heading in a certain degree with the COPs. And this applies just as much to the parties as it does to the non-state actors. So Matti was talking about the methane initiative and the forestry initiative, and there were lots of business commitments and there were lots of non-party actor commitments, including methane and forestry and a lot of the GFANs. And I think, you know, businesses will have to come back and account as well. So it's a stock taking for everybody involved in the climate process and not just for the negotiations.
Thank you. So what is your final word, Paul? In a sentence. You are the last one to close this episode. Paul.
Sorry, I was only half listening there. Sorry, apologies for my confusion. I think we've brought up a lot of things in here. The key point is there is a huge amount to be done. Someone said earlier it's not helpful to talk about a COP as being the last chance. I fully agree. It's not that, and it wasn't the case of Glasgow. But it's certainly each COP is a major moment we have to use to its best. And I think we now have to use the next year and the year after so we can really have that influence. Yes, I fully agree with what Sarah just said also about the role of bringing in the business and the other actors and seeing what they're delivering as well as just hearing the announcements. It's coming back all the time. What is actually being delivered? How do we get more? And the rules and they underpin that, but it's also using that political moment each time to go further and faster, because we know we're going to have to go there, and we know the issues, all of these issues are going to become higher and higher in importance each year as we go on.
Thank you very, very much, Paul, Thomas, Professor Abdullah, Shibli, Thorp Miller, Pierre, Kuki, Maria, Felipe, and everyone. It was a great pleasure to have you take in this 52nd episode on the outcome of Glasgow COP26. Hopefully, we'll see you again in our next any episode. Thank you very, very much. On behalf of Climate Channel, Climate Conversation with Quamrul Chowdhury, episode 52nd ends here. With a positive note, we have a lot of work to be done in 1 year, in 2 years, and to help implement Paris Agreement, landmark Paris Agreement, and also our dear Climate Framework Convention. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Paul.
Bye.
Shibli bhai, ekটু থাকেন, হ্যাঁ?
Good luck for the action.
Shibli bhai.